The moment you want someone to feel your absence is the moment your power is still tied to them. That's the part nobody tells you. Because wanting to be missed sounds like strength, but it's actually attachment wearing a tougher mask. And if you're honest, you don't want revenge. You don't want closure. You want your dignity back. You want to stop checking, stop replaying, stop wondering why someone could take your effort and treat it like it was disposable. Here's the uncomfortable truth. When someone assumes you'll always be there, they stop seeing you. Not because you're not valuable, but because you made access cheaper than respect. And the real shift doesn't happen when they regret losing you. It happens when you no longer need them to understand what they lost. By the end of this, you're going to see why walking away quietly doesn't change them first. It changes you, and that changes everything. No one ever sat you down and explained this, but the moment you overgave without standards, you signed a contract you didn't know existed. An unspoken agreement that said, I'll stay consistent even if you're not. I'll show up even when you pull away. I'll explain myself even when you stop listening. And at first it feels like love. It feels mature. It feels loyal. But slowly, without realizing it, you start trading self-respect for proximity. This is where most people get trapped. You confuse effort with value. You think the more patient you are, the more irreplaceable you become. But human psychology doesn't work that way. What people value is not endless availability. It's consistency paired with boundaries. When access has no cost, it stops being appreciated. And when someone learns you'll stay no matter how uneven the dynamic becomes, they stop investing, not out of cruelty, but out of comfort. The hardest part is this didn't happen overnight. It happened in small moments you dismissed. The text you answered instantly while waiting hours for a reply. The boundary you meant to set, but softened because you didn't want conflict. The disrespect you reframed as misunderstanding because you wanted peace more than clarity. And every time you chose silence over standards, you taught them how to treat you. What makes this contract invisible is that you benefited too, at least temporarily. You felt needed. You felt chosen. You felt secure as long as you kept performing your role. But that security was fragile because it depended on you abandoning parts of yourself to keep the connection alive. And the moment you start negotiating your worth to maintain access, the power dynamic is already broken. Here's the part most people miss. You didn't lose them when they walked away. You lost yourself the moment you decided being tolerated was better than being respected. And until you see that clearly, every attempt to move on will feel like punishment instead of relief. Most people don't disappear to heal. They disappear to be felt. They call it detachment, but it's really hope in disguise. Hope that the silence will scare someone. Hope that distance will trigger regret. Hope that being unavailable will finally make them choose you. And that's why disappearing so often fails. Because even when you're gone physically, you're still present mentally, watching, waiting, measuring the silence for signs that it's working. That's where the misunderstanding begins. Silence isn't powerful if it's performative. Vanishing doesn't mean anything if you're still checking their page, rereading old messages, or secretly timing how long it takes them to notice you're gone. In that state, you haven't disappeared. You've just removed your body while leaving your attention behind. And attention is where your power actually lives. There's a difference between walking away and hovering in the background. One is self-respect. The other is self-betrayal with better aesthetics. When disappearing is used as a tactic, it keeps you emotionally tethered to the outcome. You're still reacting. You're still waiting for a response, even if that response is silence. And as long as you're waiting, they still have influence over your inner world. Real disappearance isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with final messages or symbolic gestures. It's quiet because it's internal before it's external. It starts when you stop needing to be seen. When you stop hoping your absence will be noticed and start using that space to regulate your nervous system, to slow your thoughts, to detach from the emotional loop that kept you stuck. Here's the line that changes everything. Silence only works when it's for recovery, not reaction. The moment your disappearance is about reclaiming your peace instead of triggering their response, the dynamic breaks. Not because they feel it immediately, but because you do. And once you feel that shift, you stop measuring time by how long it takes them to miss you and start measuring progress by how little they occupy your mind. The real shift doesn't happen when they reach out. It doesn't happen when they apologize, get curious, or finally seem confused by your absence. That moment everyone waits for, the one where you imagine feeling validated, is not where power lives. Power shifts quietly, in a moment no one else can see, when your body stops waiting. You notice it one day, without warning. You wake up, and your first thought isn't them. Your phone stays face down a little longer. The urge to check fades, not because you're forcing discipline, but because the emotional charge is gone. The conversations you used to rehearse in your head start losing detail. The anger cools. The longing softens. And in that space, something unfamiliar appears. Clarity. This is the difference between emotional dependency and emotional sovereignty. Dependency keeps you oriented toward their behavior. Sovereignty brings you back into your own nervous system. You're no longer scanning for signs, interpreting tone, or assigning meaning to silence. You're present in your own life again. And that presence changes how you move, how you think, how you decide. What nobody tells you is that clarity often arrives after the pain, not during it. While you're hurting, your mind is busy defending the bond, trying to make sense of what happened, looking for ways to repair something that no longer fits. But once the emotional noise settles, you start seeing the truth without needing it to hurt. You recognize patterns you excused. You remember moments you minimized. You see how much energy you spent trying to keep something alive that was already drifting. And here's the part that matters. They may feel your absence later, but you feel your freedom first. The moment power shifts is when you stop hoping for an external reaction and start experiencing internal relief. When peace becomes more satisfying than answers. When distance feels lighter than contact ever did. And once that happens, the dynamic is over, whether they realize it or not. Letting go doesn't just hurt because you miss them. It hurts because you lose the version of yourself that existed inside that connection. The routines, the expectations, the imagined future. And when that disappears, there's a moment no one prepares you for, where the question isn't why did this end, but who am I without this? This is the collapse nobody posts about. The quiet evenings that feel too long. The sudden drop in motivation. The emptiness that shows up when the distraction is gone and you're left alone with your thoughts. It's easy to mislabel this as failure, as proof that you made the wrong decision. But what you're actually experiencing is recalibration. Your identity was organized around someone else, and now your system is reorganizing. Your brain is used to a certain rhythm, messages, anticipation, emotional spikes. When that stops, it doesn't feel peaceful at first. It feels like withdrawal. And that doesn't mean you should go back. It means your nervous system is learning how to exist without external regulation. Loneliness in this phase isn't a sign you're weak. It's a sign you're detoxing from attachment. This is where most people panic and undo their progress. They mistake discomfort for danger. They reach out not because they've healed, but because they want relief. But relief isn't the same as growth. If you stay still long enough, something important happens. The silence stops feeling heavy. The emptiness starts turning into space. And in that space, you begin to meet yourself again, not as someone reacting, but as someone choosing. Missing someone doesn't mean you should return to them. It means you're human. But learning to sit with that feeling without acting on it is what separates collapse from transformation. This phase isn't the end of you. It's the part where your identity stops being borrowed and starts becoming your own. This is where the work actually begins, and almost no one sees it. Not because it's secret, but because it isn't loud. Rebuilding doesn't start with a glow-up post or a sudden reinvention. It starts with quiet decisions that no one applauds. Going to bed on time. Moving your body even when motivation is gone. Keeping your word to yourself after you've broken it so many times for someone else. There's a temptation here to be visible, to show progress, to let them see that you're doing better. But that urge is just attachment trying to survive in a new form. When growth needs an audience, it's still dependent. And dependence keeps you tied to the same dynamic you're trying to escape. Real rebuilding happens when no one is watching and no one needs to know. Private growth repairs something deeper than confidence. It repairs self-trust. Every routine you keep, every impulse you resist, every day you choose structure over spiraling, you're teaching yourself that you're reliable, that you can hold yourself together without external validation. And that lesson compounds. Slowly, your life becomes less reactive and more intentional. This doesn't mean isolation. It means selectivity. You stop oversharing your process with people who haven't earned access. You stop explaining your changes. You let results exist without commentary. And in doing so, you remove pressure. You're no longer performing healing. You're living it. Here's what changes when you rebuild without announcing it. Your progress stops being fragile. It doesn't depend on likes, praise, or anyone noticing. It becomes stable, grounded, yours. And one day, you realize you're no longer building to prove anything. You're building because the structure itself feels good, because discipline has replaced chaos, and peace has replaced urgency. Closure is one of the most misunderstood ideas in healing. People talk about it like it's a conversation, an apology, or a final explanation that makes everything make sense. But that version of closure keeps you waiting. It keeps your healing dependent on someone else's awareness, honesty, or emotional maturity. And that's why so many people stay stuck, not because they don't know what happened, but because they're still hoping for permission to move on. Here's the hard truth. Even if they explained everything perfectly, it wouldn't give you what you're looking for. Understanding doesn't erase disrespect. Answers don't undo patterns. And clarity from someone who already showed you inconsistency wouldn't suddenly make the experience feel safe. The brain wants closure because it thinks information will reduce pain. But what actually reduces pain is alignment. Most people seek closure to delay grief. As long as there's one more conversation possible, one more message that could arrive, the door stays open just enough to avoid finality. But that door is also where your energy leaks out. You replay scenarios. You rewrite conversations. You imagine what you would say if given one more chance. And all of that keeps you emotionally invested in something that already ended. Real closure isn't something you receive. It's something you decide. It's the moment you stop asking questions that don't change your standards. It's when you accept that not everything needs to be understood to be released. Some things end because they no longer align with who you're becoming, not because someone failed to explain themselves properly. The shift happens when you realize this. The answers you're waiting for wouldn't have saved the relationship anyway. What would have saved it was respect, consistency, and effort over time. And once you see that clearly, the need for closure dissolves. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in relief. Because you're no longer waiting for a conversation to give you permission to move forward. There's a day that arrives quietly, without ceremony, where something irreversible settles in. It's not dramatic. There's no rush of adrenaline, no victory feeling, no urge to tell anyone about it. You just notice that the door you once guarded so carefully is no longer being watched. Not because you're trying to keep someone out, but because you're no longer standing there. This is the day you become unreachable. Not physically, but emotionally. A message could come through, and it wouldn't spike your nervous system. An apology could appear and it wouldn't change your direction. Even regret, if it showed up late and sincere, wouldn't pull you backward. And that's not because you've hardened. It's because you've outgrown the version of yourself that needed it. What makes this moment powerful is that it isn't fueled by pride. There's no satisfaction in being missed. There's no urge to withhold as punishment. You simply wouldn't accept what once felt negotiable. The standards have shifted quietly, and now the distance between who you were and who you are feels too wide to cross. This is when you realize the connection didn't end because you walked away. It ended because you became incompatible with it. Your nervous system chose stability over intensity. Your identity chose alignment over attachment. And once that happens, there's no going back without betraying yourself. The world doesn't notice this day. They don't mark it. But it's the most important turning point in the entire process. Because from here on, you're no longer healing to return. You're living forward. And whatever they feel after this point no longer has access to you. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. This is where transformation becomes tangible. You don't just walk away from someone. You replace what you depended on with something stronger. Peace. Not a fleeting distraction, not a show of calm for others to see, but a deliberate, structured state you cultivate every day. Peace is the framework that stops old patterns from pulling you back, the ballast that stabilizes you when longing or doubt arises. Start by reclaiming your attention. Stop pouring energy into moments that don't serve you. That means no checking their social media, no replaying conversations, no crafting scenarios that keep you tethered. Every second you spend reliving the past is a second you take away from building your present. Replace that mental space with action, movement, reading, reflection, or creating. Even 5 minutes a day of intentional focus compounds faster than weeks of wishful thinking. Next, protect your boundaries in silence. Peace thrives where access is intentional. Say no to things that drain you even subtly. Don't justify yourself. Don't explain. Don't negotiate your value. Your energy is finite, and every choice reinforces who gets a seat in your life. When you enforce your boundaries without drama, peace grows because your mind stops reacting and starts directing. Finally, anchor your identity in self-sufficiency. Your worth is no longer tied to someone noticing it. Your calm, your clarity, your discipline, they are your inheritance, not theirs. The more you practice showing up for yourself, the less attachment has a hold. And here's the quiet payoff. When your peace replaces attachment, you no longer orbit someone else's chaos. You walk in your own orbit. And that is the moment you become untouchable, not by control, not by force, but by simply being grounded in yourself. The real victory isn't announced. It isn't a post, a message, or a public display. It's the quiet when you feel in the depth of your own life. It's waking up without anxiety, without the pull of old patterns, without the need to justify your choices to anyone who never respected them. It's feeling full, steady, and aligned, even when the world around you is chaotic or distracting. This is where transformation proves itself. You've stopped performing for approval, stopped reacting to attempts at manipulation, stopped measuring your worth by someone else's recognition. Instead, you measure it by your clarity, your discipline, and your presence. You've rebuilt yourself in silence, reclaimed your energy, and replaced attachment with peace. And in that quiet mastery, you hold something no one can take away, your sovereignty. The people who once controlled your emotional landscape now exist only in memory, and that memory carries no power over you. You walk forward with intention, your standards intact, your priorities aligned, and your life structured around growth, not distraction. And that is the quiet win, the one that changes everything internally, long before anyone outside notices. Because when you live for fulfillment instead of recognition, when you protect your peace instead of chasing validation, you no longer just survive the world. you rise above it. And that rise, steady and unannounced, is your proof that real strength was never about them. It was always about becoming the version of yourself they could never touch.